For many of us, the concept of health is defined as absence of disease. But do you really believe that to be true? As a specialist surgeon and teacher, I have come to the firm belief that true health is a balanced state between the mind, the body, and the soul. Under the Knife with Dr. Arun is an attempt to tap into the wisdom of world experts from various fields to learn practical tools that can allow us to change our own destiny. Not just in the field of health and wellness, rather in every facet of a fulfilled life. But it begins with health. Because as Emerson said, health is our first wealth, the value of which is only recognized when it is lost. Join me in welcoming another global expert in this episode as we explore some amazing self-empowering ideas today. Hello everybody, and welcome to another episode of Under the Knife. Under the Knife is a series of interviews that I embarked on earlier this year, and I can tell you that I have been truly amazed by the quality of people that have come on this interview and the wisdom that they have shared with me and with my audience. Today, I have a very special person with me. And the reason why I say very special is that this person is someone who I met for the first time just after the lockdown had started to kind of, begin to fade off, I should say. And the first meeting with him truly inspired me to be able to approach him, to learn more from him. There are sometimes you meet some people and you just want a greater piece of them. Well, Rik Schnabel was one of them. Rik, I thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for taking out the time to share with me your thoughts, your journey, and what your life purpose has been so far, not only to sort of benefit the humanity, but also to be so authentic, because what I've learned from you is that being authentic is the first form of respect that you can give to yourself. So I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for being on this show.
You are most welcome, and it's actually a privilege. And I remember the very first time we met, and it was, our meeting was almost, in a sense, a case of kindred spirit, because I came to learn pretty quickly that our visions for the world are quite well aligned. You care as much about humanity and the world as I do.
No, thank you, Rik. So without further ado, let me just introduce you firstly to our audience who's always looking for new people who bring in new concepts and new ideas. Now, Rik Schnabel learned how to untrain his brain. Now, that's something which we are going to delve further into, but he is Australia's #1 brain untrainer. Through the pain of his own desperation, he beat the threat of homelessness to master the mind and beliefs of to earn millions. With over 38,000 brain untraining hours, he has helped his clients achieve beyond their limits. He is multiple best-selling author, a world-class master NLP trainer, a leading life coach, a life coach trainer, a radio host, and a passionate and articulate force for the good in the world. I love your work, Rik, and you are also a genuine human being, a loving husband, and a wonderful dad. And I know that from my association with you. So, Rik, I think I'm really keen to get into this conversation because I think it will not only benefit you and I, but anybody who may be listening to this conversation. So first, tell me, what does this brain untrainer mean? It was certainly sparked my curiosity when I first heard that, because being a medical professional, it's all about training to do this, training to do that. You got to learn to do this and learn to do that. What do you mean by untraining?
Well, I guess I'll take you back to when I was 7 years old. I really did believe that I was very mixed up, and I believe that I was very, very troubled. But a lot of that came from my experience growing up. I love her dearly. Please don't get me wrong with what I'm about to say. But my mother was a woman who could not control her emotion.
Mm.
And when I stepped out of line, by her rules, her decisions, I would get caned. And my mother wasn't a person who would just give you a hit and say, you've done the wrong thing. She couldn't stop hitting you. And so as a result, when a child experiences that from their own mother, what they do is they start to make a decision, which is, am I okay? Are you okay? Or are you not okay and I'm okay? Or are you not okay and I'm not okay? Now, my decision was actually, you're okay because you're the adult, and I'm obviously not okay. So I was very, very troubled through this, started to come through life with a very, very, very low self-esteem. And I was a follower, I wasn't a leader, and I would just do what people asked me to do. I was a people pleaser because I had been trained to basically rescind and to retreat and to obey and to do what other people told me to do, and particularly if they were an adult or bigger than me. So I was bullied and all sorts of things happened to me.
And just to add there, Rik, I can relate to that coming from Indian origin and Indian parents. All right. And my dad was in the army. So, there was a level of discipline and
Yes.
super discipline. And even now, till date, I'm 51 years old. My parents want to exercise a level of extreme control on me.
Yes.
And I can relate to what you're saying. And I love my parents dearly.
Yeah.
Absolutely, without a doubt, as would you. But
Yeah.
the point is that I think what you're saying is so true, that we have been conditioned to act and behave in a certain way. Sorry, I had to just share that how deeply I connect with that of what you're saying. So,
and you do raise a great point here, as well, and that is that it's very easy to make someone the bad guy, the bad person. We've watched the Hollywood formulas. We know how the story is. You're the bad guy, you're the good guy. And, as you rightly say, you love your parents, so do I. And what I get and I understand is that they just could not control their emotions. And that was the paradigm. That was very much, the idea back in that time, that what you did is you made sure you hit them hard, so that they never, ever did that again. And that was, pretty much 101 parenting. Correct. But of course, thankfully now today, we know that model really sucks. And, as a technical description there. But I had to retreat, and I went into the library, and my first reference, I'm okay, you're okay, actually came from my very first psychology book that I read. I started to get quite bored with the children's section. And, I was only 7 years old after all, but the next area just outside of the children's section was the psychology section. Wow. So I just happened upon I'm okay, you're okay, because I recognized that book because a good friend of mine, his mother was reading that book. Right. So I pulled it out, went in the children's section, read my psychology book, and I started to become fascinated about the fact that there was this opportunity to not be who you thought you were. And a lot of the psychology texts really didn't give you tools that helped you to get out of that mold, but they gave you ideas and definitions as to who you become. And that is because. So I started to get that bridge. I started to realize that you become who you become through your conditioning. So all of a sudden that got me curious. And I started to think, well, how can you get out of your conditioning? And in all honesty, I searched right through up until I was about 40, actually. And even though I had found success, even though I had done some good things, I felt like a faker. I felt like a fraud. I felt like there was something still wrong with me. And then I came through the corridors of life coaching, and I graduated as a coach, but that wasn't enough. So I started to do research on NLP, EFT, TFT, all of these various modalities, and I began to change.
So do I understand, Rick, just to go back on that question of untraining your brain,
Yeah,
and this is a very common journey that a lot of people undertake, like there is a negative emotion, there is a
yeah,
trauma of some sort, uh, and that causes an individual to behave and function and think in a certain way.
yes,
You were fortunate enough, you were blessed enough to be able to start to recognize through that, fortuitous incident of finding that book in the library, to actually question that, do I really have to behave and function in that subdued state of, I should say, just receive. So how did you start to interact with your parents after starting to read all this? Like, did it change in any way? Did you start to did it sow seeds of brain untraining?
well, it did sow the seeds. It made me realize a really big thing, and that was that I thought that knowledge was going to set me free. But in truth, it wasn't knowledge that really set me free. It was knowing strategies and systems and structures and applying those structures and testing those structures and getting a sense of, can you shift a person from here to here? I'll give you a classic example. There was a lady who came to see me at one point, and she was very troubled, very, very troubled. But forgive what I'm going to say, because I'm going to blurt out what happened, because you have to know the backstory. She was a young girl. Her mother would do things like put her up against a wall, and she would say, "What is the color of that wall?" Now, the wall was white. And then she would say, "It's white." And then her mother would hit her on the head and say, "It's black." And then she would say, "What is the color of the wall?" And then the little girl would say, "It's black." And then she would hit her again and say, "You're a liar." Now, that does a child's head in, besides
Oh,
being domestic violence and you know, that's torment, really. And worse, what she ended up doing was she prostituted her out at a very young age. Like, before she was a teenager, her mother turned her own daughter into a prostitute. Now, here I'm now working with a 40-year-old woman, and she's in tears and she's doesn't know what to do. And I have to work out, what is the program that caused it, and how do I interfere with that program, shift it, change it, in order for her to re-identify. And I can remember we were sitting in a session at one point, and she said to me, and we were squealing our wheels. We really weren't making any traction. And it was the third session. And I was personally getting a bit frustrated, because I really wanted for her to move and get some resolution to this. And then all of a sudden, the penny dropped. She said, "I don't know why a mother would do that to her daughter." And I said, there's a solution.
mm,
And she said, "Well, what do you mean?" And I said, "Think about the mindset that you have to embrace in order to even get some level of understanding, because that, in my view, was insanity." And all of a sudden, I could see this light globe come on, and her eyes widened. And she said, "I get it." She said, "No wonder I've been feeling like I'm going insane." And I said, "So what you're doing is you're trying to shift your thinking to become almost insane, to be able to understand why a mother would do that." So questions are so important. The questions that we ask ourselves, the questions that she was asking herself was, how could a mother do that? Now, the only answer would have been an answer that could have come from insanity.
insanity. Yeah.
And that was the pivotal point. From that point on, we could start to, she got beyond the point of understanding. She recognized that. So she now had no more need for understanding. She
Mm.
just needed healing, and she needed to move on. So that's where the brain untraining comes in. That's where you've got to get into those patterns. You've got to shift those elements that hold a belief, a vision of oneself, an identity. It's a little bit like when we look at ourselves in the mirror, we will say something in our heads about ourselves. Now, some people look at themselves in the mirror and say, "Oh, my nose is too big, my eyes are too this, my neck is too that, my head is too this." And, it's perpetual judgment.
It's generally negative, right? It's
Usually.
generally sort of, it's something that pulls you down rather than
Yeah.
uplifts you, because it takes a lot of courage, and you almost feel you're a liar when you're looking into the mirror and saying something good about yourself.
Yeah. Or you feel like someone's going to say, what? Are you full of yourself or what?
Yeah,
So there's that tall poppy syndrome as well.
right.
But, actually, they ran this experiment many years ago, and I can't recall the number. I think it was about 100 or so people that were all clinically classified as depressed.
Mm-hmm.
And what they had to do for a solid 3 months is they had to, every single day, they had to look at the mirror, and they would have to say things like, I love you. I
Oh,
love you.
I think I know that experiment. Yeah.
And equally, some of them had to just simply smile. That, there were some people who couldn't say things like that, but all they had to do was smile at the mirror for 15 minutes a day. What they found after 3 months, it wasn't 50% got through depression. It wasn't 60. It wasn't even 80. It was 100%.
Wow.
Every single person started to shift their judgment and condemnation of themselves to the degree that they began to lift. So, by the way, that's a little message to anyone who's watching this right now. If you're suffering from any low self-esteem, that's certainly something you could do very
And
easily.
in fact, Rick, I recollect the work of Louise Hay from Hay House, the founder of
Yeah,
Hay House.
yeah,
She actually talks about mirror therapy. And
yes,
that is something that I have embraced in my practice in a very gentle way. And
yeah,
I've been practicing this myself, like just after shower, after you get ready in the morning. And Louise Hay would have a set of affirmations. Stand in front of the mirror,
yeah.
look straight into your eyes, and you actually say that I love you. And initially she says it's going to be very uncomfortable. You're going to cry because it is going to bring up all those emotions because
Yeah,
you've never heard that, right?
yeah.
In a genuine, authentic way. So, Rick, can I say, I think this is turning into a really deep conversation, and I can get a bit of a sense of the intense work that you do, like, dealing with the case that you just mentioned.
Yeah.
Oh my God, even just listening to that is bringing about, like, some heart-wrenching emotions within me. So I can imagine what you would be feeling as somebody who's trying to help. Because regardless of what you say, I'm a medical practitioner, you see patients, you're not supposed to be emotionally involved with your clients, but like these sort of stories affect you, right?
Oh, they do.
They do kind of have an impact on you. So tell me, I want to just shift gears a little bit. I want to come back to you.
Yeah,
You had mentioned in your bio, I read that you were close to homelessness. Now
yeah.
that seems to be a pretty dire state, considering that where you are today with the amount of success and authority that you command. Tell me a little bit about that Rick who was on the verge of homelessness.
Yeah, the thing that I had two major turning points in my life. One particular point in my life, I tried to take my own life, and I was just in a horrible space. I had we had the recession that we had to have here in Australia. Paul Keating was quoted as saying that, and it was at the time that I had started an advertising agency that was really taking off. And, we were building a lot of momentum, getting a lot of clients. But then, when the recession happened, what occurred is that we ended up getting people's debts. And every day the phone went, it was another debt, someone else's debt. And, it was either accountants, or it was lawyers, or it was the client themselves simply saying, I'm really sorry, but, we have to declare bankrupt. And they would follow by saying, how much are we into you for? And you'd be there going, you owe us 80,000. And they would say things like, I'm so sorry, which doesn't really help a great
Oh,
deal. But it just went down and down and down. And I got to a point where I remember sitting there one night, all the staff had left, and I was there in the office on my own, and I worked out on a calculator how long it would take me based on my current income to pay out all these debts. And I was 35 at the time. And it worked out I was going to be 70 years old before I got rid of all my debt and was perhaps able to buy a home. And so it was quite debilitating. And I decided that was it. I didn't want to live anymore. And so I tried to take my life. And I could remember that what happened was I tried to drown myself. And a friend of mine who was a surfer, I remember a conversation we had in the surf one day because, surfing, you've always got the risk of drowning. And he said, oh, apparently, when you drown, you take in your first gulp of water, and after that, your brain kind of clicks and you go into a euphoria, and then you die. So I thought, I'm going to do that. And so I was there, and, I remember I had a pool in my backyard, and I used to have this thing where I used to try to hold my breath and see how many times I could go underwater and kick off each end. And I decided this was it. I was going to break my record and I was going to die. So I dived in, and I got myself I was angry, and I was just going from end to end, but I was really resigned as well. And I took in my first gulp of water, and it felt like I had been punched in the chest by God Almighty. And because I'd taken in chlorine, and I'd taken in, all
salt water.
Yeah, salt water, because, actually it was a salted pool, but it had chlorine in it as well. And it burned so bad. And it forced me out just naturally. I arched up, I came out of the water, and all the water came out of my mouth. And and at that point, once I'd kind of, reflected on what I'd tried to do, and I was all alone, and I was just there on my own. And I said, that's it. I'm going to do everything I can to fix this. And I had ideas about learning neuro-linguistic programming back then, and all these ideas of what I was going to do. And I knew that most of this was all my mindset. And so it was from that particular point that I decided that I was going to do something.
Would you say that was almost like a NDE kind of a thing, without really dying, but
without the death,
having the same close to that epiphany, as we call it,
Yeah.
It was a turning point. But tell us about the other point that you were saying, Rik.
Well, the other point was I didn't get straight into learning NLP, and I didn't get straight into learning these things after that event, because life was I was financially strapped. But I didn't realize I had built in my brain a financial trauma. And so I wouldn't invest in myself. I just wouldn't invest in myself. And funny, I'm writing a book at the moment. I'm saying the two greatest excuses that people give is I don't have the money, I don't have the time. And I went to a seminar about life coaching. And before I went there, one of my good friends said, hey, what are you doing? And I said, I'm going to a seminar to, check out something. And he said, what are you checking out? And I said, life coaching. He said, can I come? I said, sure. And we were in the seminar, and basically, I was listening to what they were sharing. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I so want to do this. This is it. I do want to do this. And then they came out with a figure, and I remember it was $7,500. And I could feel my body reacting to the fact that I wanted this, but my poverty mentality would not let me spend that money. And so what happened was my buddy next to me, he nudges me and he says, I want to do this. And that was the worst thing that I could imagine him saying. So I could almost feel myself prepping for this. Okay. So I said to him, his name was Tony, and I said, Tony, I don't have the time. And Tony said, rubbish. He said, you and I work together. He said, just take holidays, and then I had my next one. But Tony, I don't have the money. And he said, that motorbike you have, how
Oh,
much is that? How much is that worth? You said you were trying to sell it. And I said, it's probably worth about 16,500. And he said, what could you sell it for? And I said, probably 10 quite easily. And he
uh-huh.
said, there you go. There's the money.
Wow.
So what I actually did is I promised Tony I was going to do this, but I didn't advertise it. I just put a rotten old sign on it. So as he drove past, he could see that I was selling my motorbike because I was living in Melbourne City at the time.
Right.
And he would always drive past to see whether the motorbike was sold. And then on the final day of registrations, which the registrations closed on a Friday, that Thursday, I had two people who called me and they both wanted that damn motorbike.
Wow.
And so it sold. And of course, I did the course. And then that kind of led to my next moment, my next major decision. And that was after that, I had now started the course.
Mm.
I then also went on to invest in learning NLP as well. You know, neuro linguistic programming, for those of you who don't know what that stands for. But essentially, that was the game changer.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying, Rick, is about, there's a book by Dr. Schwartz, Magic of Thinking Big,
Yeah.
and he talks about 𝗄𝗶𝗁𝗂𝗧. It's a disease of people, and he gives it a nice name.
Yes.
It's a disease of the glands in your body that produce excuse.
Yeah,
Excuse
totally.
after excuse, and the biggest one, as you're saying, is excuse of time poverty. I'm not the right age. I don't have
Yeah.
money. All these are excuses.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
tell me something. And I think I heard you mention very briefly that you said something about the need to untrain your brain for your own healing. Now that's a
Yeah.
really powerful sort of statement, Rick, and I was kind of making some notes as you were talking about. And I think over and just sharing something about my own journey at being a medical practitioner, I trained as a surgeon, and I'm a surgeon, and sometimes it feels that I'm treating the person's body. But as I have progressed on this journey, I've come to this firm belief that our body is showing us the end outcome of the negative emotional states that we have been harboring over decades and over generations as well. Now I'm coming to believe it. Now this is not black magic or some
Yeah.
kind of outer planetary travel or anything like that, which is crazy. But I feel truly that I am so convinced that we all need to heal ourselves.
Yeah.
So tell me, Rick, how do you approach this as a brain untrainer? Because this is a work that may require generations.
Well, the piece that I don't believe humanity as a whole, as a collective, really have gotten a hang of or really fully grasp or understand is that our thoughts really do become things.
Mm,
And you'll say that to a general audience, and a general audience will probably be nodding with you in agreement. But there is knowledge, and then there's application of knowledge.
correct.
And there are so many people who know this, but really don't know how do you apply this. And I had a mentor who used to come out with a Chinese proverb with regularity. And he used to direct it to me because he was mentoring me. And one day he said to me, Rick, you know I'm not an entertainer. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, I noticed that when we have our mentoring session, you're taking notes and notes and notes and notes. And then in our next session, I'm asking you, what did you do? And you say, well, I took some really good notes.
Yeah,
And he used to say this Chinese proverb, which is to know and not yet to do is not yet to know.
yeah.
And he used
And
to
that
say
is
that with regularity to just really deepen it, but
And
brain
I think
untrainer.
another way of saying that, Rick, sorry, is that, which I recently came across is knowledge by itself is not power. It's applied knowledge that is
Yes,
power. So, and I think
absolutely.
absolutely, please.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you.
No, all good. But brain untraining at the end of the day is what you're doing is you're looking at you're essentially looking at a gap. In fact, here's a wonderful book. You know, your mess has a message.
Oh my God.
This just
You're
happens to be
embarrassing me.
Dr. Arun. So this is your book, a lovely book, by the way, folks. You know, make sure you get a copy of this.
Thank you.
But you describe in that book the wedge, and you know, that gap between who you think you are and who you ultimately want to be. So what brain untraining is that what you're essentially doing is, first of all, you finding out what is that endpoint. Where does that person want to be? Or what does that person want to do? Or what do they simply want to achieve as a goal? Now, the only reason that they're coming to you, and the only reason clients come to me, is because they're aware of that gap. So now what my job is, I've got to, first of all, typically what we'll do is we'll talk very strategy. You know, so you want to get there, what's your current strategy? And then they'll share their strategy. I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do that, then I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do that. Now, typically what happens is most people will say, you know, I've done that and I've done that and I've done that, but I haven't done that. And then you ask, why haven't you done that? And that's when you usually uncover beliefs, patterns, neurology, things that are getting them stuck. So, for example, over the years, I've coached many wonderful, amazing people. And, you know, quite often I'll coach an executive who is now going and becoming a board member or something along that line. And they'll say something like, most of them put on very brave faces, of course, because they're professionals. And then I'll often say to them, please understand that the more vulnerable you're willing to be, the more opportunities you'll open the door for. You know, if you're just telling me what you want your board members to hear, or your executive management team to hear, or your wife and family to hear, but in truth, it's not the real truth, then it's not going to serve you. So I remember there was one particular gentleman, and he didn't want to take that step. The step was, and I had to find out why he wasn't taking this next step. So what I did is I said to him, what is this like? And he said, it's like going into the lion's den. Now, we talk in metaphors all the time. So I said, okay, so why is it like going into the lion's den? And he said, Rik, you don't know. These people are very powerful and cruel people, he said. So I said, okay, so what makes you think that they're powerful and cruel? Powerful suggests that they're stronger than you. Cruel suggests that you're a victim. And he said, well, I guess in some ways I feel like that. He said they're bullies. And that was the next word that he used to describe this group of people. And he said, I've been on another board with a couple of them, and frankly, they're bullies. So what I did is I took him through a process. I said, are you okay if we do the inner work here? And he said, sure. And so one particular technique we use is essentially, it's often called timeline. And timeline is essentially when what we do, it's usually a closed eye process, because you want to get rid of all reality. You want to shut reality out for a moment, because I took him back to the very first time he went into the lion's den, the very first time he was bullied. And he came to an event, and he said he was 17. He was in a shopping center with his mother and father. And what happened, it was around the time that there were lots of gangs. Right. And so he was bored being with his mum and dad, and his dad said, look, here's the keys to the car. If you want to go back to the car, you can do that, or have a look around. Be back at the car at this time, and we'll all meet back at the car at that time. So he started going off on his own, and he said that he felt very much like a victim as a teenager. Now, victim has an energy about it. Victim has to attract a victor. You can't be a victim without a victor, and victims will always find their victors.
Mm.
So he's going through the shopping center. It was a big shopping center with, shops all over the place. And there was a gang of guys who saw him and decided they were going to pick on him.
Oh, right.
So they started picking on him, and he showed fear fairly quickly to the degree that he ran, and some people are very primal, and it's no different to a wild dog. If you run away from a wild animal, it will chase you because it already knows it has the upper hand.
Correct.
So they chased him, and he ran, and he didn't know what to do because he was in fear and he was in panic. He went to the car. By the way, this is back in the days when you actually had to put the key in the car and turn it. He's got these gang of thugs who are now racing behind him. He puts his key in the car, tries to turn it, opens the door, jumps in the car, and then pulls the door and pushes the lock down.
Yeah.
So he's now safe.
Okay.
But of course, these guys start kicking the car.
Oh my God.
And this is back in the days when they used to wear these big platform shoes. And they are now kicking in nearly every panel on the side that he jumped into until someone's yelled out, and then they all ran off. Now, you have a 17-year-old boy who's shaking. He's got to make a very critical decision here. Does he tell his parents what happened? Or does he get out of the car when it's safe, lock the car, walk away, and pretend it didn't happen?
Yeah.
He took option B.
Oh, right. Okay.
So what he has built in his mind,
and he bottled it up in himself.
Yeah, absolutely. So in his identity is, I'm a coward and I'm a liar.
And I'm a victim.
Exactly. And I'm a victim.
Yeah.
So this was actually the very first piece of really deep work that we did. And when he came back after this session, it was a very deep session. There was certainly a bit of emotion that was coming up through it, but it was full points to him. He was very courageous to do it. And what we had actually done is we had untrained his brain of that by doing a few other things. So, for example, what you do is you rise up above the event and you put yourself in what's called a third position. So in other words, you are no longer you. You are now looking at you, or maybe you're even someone else looking at you. And now you've got to make a new decision about this, such as, now that you've seen all of this play out, you know the past, you know the present, you know the future, you know exactly how it all came out. What would you do differently? And so now you're looking from a wiser perspective. Now, what this does is this literally starts rewriting that neural pathway, because the imagination starts to build who we are. In other words, your unconscious mind is where we're doing the work. Doesn't know the difference between imagination and reality, particularly when we turn it into a visual, auditory, kinesthetic, full-bodied process. So what it's literally doing is it's rewriting the code or rewriting the biochemistry in the neurology. So now he has a neuron in his head, which is the wiser part of him. And then what you do is, after this process, you then get them to go back into the event with this new knowledge, and they rewrite the movie. So they're rewriting the movie, and rewriting the movie. Now the final piece is you push them into the present with this new insight and with this new understanding. And over the years, I've seen magic happen with this process. But still, I'm amazed.
Yeah. No, I think, Rik, what you're describing is something almost like, this is how I understand, and I'm not a psychologist, but it's about visualizing in a way that you believe with emotion. You put the feeling into that. So, and you're looking at it as a third person. How would other people see you?
Exactly.
And that takes a level of, actually, as you very correctly said, vulnerability, to be able to open up and actually acknowledge
Yeah.
Where, and it reminds me of this phrase from the Bible, and I'm not a Christian, but I love reading stuff from different sort of spiritual texts as well. And it says the fear, the cave that you fear to enter holds the treasure that you seek. Now,
Yes.
I think that is so powerful that unless we open up, and not open up to someone else, but actually be true to ourselves. And I think that's where that authenticity, that vulnerability comes. So, just given the paucity of time, Rick, there's so many questions that I want to ask you, because this is like, tell me something. I know you are doing a detox. You shared it with me a little
Yeah.
while ago
Yeah.
that what is the role of detoxing and cleaning, which are dietary kind of practices, let's put it this way, or nutritional practices. What role do you see in an individual to be able to manage their emotional states better?
Okay. The thing is, I've always been a massive fan of, the neural work, the brain work.
Of course.
And I know that the brain work isn't the full story. And so what we can also do is influence our brain by understanding that one of the greatest things that starts to gather in our brain are essentially metals.
Right.
And we get
What
metals.
metals are we talking about?
Well, we're talking about, broadly metals, and they're very many different metals, such as aluminiums and irons and all sorts of different types of metals. Like, for example, just wrapping food in aluminium foil and putting in the barbecue, you're going to get some of those metals in the fish. You know, equally so when you put on colognes and aftershaves, they have metals in them. Equally, when you have a
But
bowl
just
of
on the token of fish itself has got a lot of mercury,
mercury, and mercury,
swordfish and all that. Yeah, that's heavy metals.
absolutely. And mercury is such a horrible, horrible, horrible metal.
Mm.
In that mercury usually holds a virus. And in fact, the virus starts eating the mercury and starts building its strength till finally it starts to attack you, once it's done that. But what essentially happens is these metals that we consume, and they come from many different sources, these metals go through the blood-brain barrier and they go into our brain. Now, given our brain essentially is, if you think about a thought and we slow a thought down, a thought essentially is a biochemistry that goes down our dendrites, through that axiom, and then starts firing off electrical charges. So neurons don't actually touch.
No,
But,
it's a
but
neurotransmitter, clearly.
Exactly. And that neurotransmitter is electrical. So you start putting metals in your brain, all of a sudden you're going to get shorts. You're essentially going to have thoughts that are just unclear, or you're a bit foggy, or you're a bit hazy. And so as a result, the cleanses that I love to do is to clear those metals out of my body, because I know
Can you
over
tell
the
us,
years.
Rick, some of the cleanses that you suggest to your clients? Is there anything that you could share with our audience today?
Yeah, actually, I will give a rap to a gentleman who's done an incredible amount of research in this space, and his name's Anthony William. And if you simply do a search on medical
The
medium,
medical medium, yes,
you will
yes.
find he's got some great new books out. And of course, whenever he gets any books out, we're the first to buy.
Isn't he the celery juice man?
Yeah, absolutely. One man that single-handedly increased the price of celery juice around the world.
Yes.
But the thing is, many of his brain type shots that he suggests are fantastic. So I would suggest the audience to kind of start doing a bit of research there, and perhaps get the Brain Saver books. But the one detox for the metals that I have on a regular basis, it's basically got a bunch of wild berries in it. They're all essentially fruits and vegetables that you can get from anywhere. But What I would suggest that the viewer does today is do a bit of research, find out exactly what they're needing. I highly recommend the metal detox.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I recommend the celery juice. We have celery juice probably about 5 times a week, metal detox is 3 times a week. We have brain saver shots every day.
Right. So can I just confirm these brain saver shots are actually some powder that you get and
No,
you,
no, they're actually usually blended
oh, so you,
juices.
okay, these are blended
Yeah,
juices.
yeah,
And are
and
they pre-made or do you make it yourself?
you make it yourself.
Okay, so every day you would make a brain shot sort of a
Yeah,
thing. Okay,
yeah, absolutely. And as a result, I mean, I had something medical just recently. You know,
right,
I had a kidney stone.
right.
But the thing that I realized, I mean, I said to the surgeons, you know, when I
Oh,
was
these
going in,
surgeons, did they take out their knife or did they blast it?
yeah, they blasted it.
Got it.
But the interesting thing is, I said to the surgeons, I said, guys, okay, you're the experts. I do not want to end up over there too many times in my life. In fact,
Yeah.
this is the last one, I'm hoping.
Mm-hmm.
So, what would you suggest I do in order to ensure that I never get another one of these kidney stones? You
Mm.
know, but the thing that I found really fascinating is I have never been in hospital for an illness.
Wow.
You know, I've been there for broken bones, which is
Mm.
mishaps,
Yes,
you know,
yes.
and I love adventure and I love throwing myself off cliffs and jumping out of planes and stuff like
That's
that.
the price you have to pay for all that adventure, right?
Yeah, that's right. Sometimes it goes wrong. But the thing is that, you know, I look after my body. My
Mm.
body is my temple. And in
Yeah,
fact, my home is here.
yeah,
This is my house. And
yeah,
this is the most important part of my body. Mind you, I have a brain here in my heart and I have a brain in my
yeah.
gut as well. Of course,
Yes.
you do a lot of work on the gut brain.
In fact, that is where, like I often say that Jim Rohn, who you probably know as well,
Yes.
like an amazing, powerful personal development guru, God bless him, he's no longer with us.
Yeah.
He said, take good care of your body. That's the only place you have to live. So, like,
Yes.
we often say, oh, we live here and we live there, but we actually are these spiritual beings who are living in this body. So he put it really beautifully, and you don't have to be a doctor to recognize that.
Oh, absolutely.
So,
But you know, I think doctors these days are so broadening their skills. You know, they're starting to see so many opportunities, you know, in so many different areas rather than their prime category of what they've learned. You're a good example of that. You've been researching deep in so many different areas.
I mean, I feel, Rick, that I think the bottom line is that as a medical professional, when patients come to me to seek surgical opinion, and they're vulnerable.
Yes.
And I see that this is an opportunity for me to be of genuine service to them, to not just operate, but actually imprint or help them recognize the deeper emotional sort of, reactions that are leading to disease. Whether it's treating obesity, treating
Yeah.
cancer, treating gut health issues. And these days, I'm reading a book which is called The Molecules of Emotion.
Ah,
It's a
beautiful.
very powerful book and it's a very medically orientated book, but I'm loving it that there are molecules in your emotional states that are actually creating your healing. So I'm still going through it, but I just love the title of the book, and I said I got to pick it up. So Rick, I think look, we are both on the same page on that context that you are helping people change their behaviors, change their habits, which are nothing else but neurological patterns. They are like
Exactly.
there are circuits in the brain which you call it a habit, that I get angry or I get upset, and you are helping them change that circuit. And I think what I want to ask you is that it is this term called neuroplasticity. That is really what defines the basis of the work that you're doing. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, absolutely. Neuroplasticity, NLP, EFT, TFT, all of these sorts of tools and techniques are all speaking exactly the same language, but under different banners.
Different banners.
It's a little bit like, at the end of the day, there actually is no difference between hypnosis and meditation. Accepting that hypnosis is typically directed towards helping a person to change at the unconscious level, but the modalities in which they deliver it looks like meditation or looks like mindfulness
or visualization, or whatever.
Or visualization, exactly. But what's happening in humanity is there's a lot of splitting of hairs going on.
Everybody wants to have like a piece of the pie and call it their own, their unique one thing that they have to present, or people have to use that, and I think that's where people get very territorial about things, and I tend to shy away from that. Rik, it's been a delight speaking to you, and I think our conversation could go on for another few hours, and we would still be kind of still wanting to talk about more things. But in the interest of time, can I just say that it's been a delight speaking to you, and every guest that I bring on this show, I ask them these 3 questions that are really sort of, not only thought-provoking, but it gives the listener an insight as to what is it that is driving this person, So if you allow me, I want to ask you these 3 questions. My first question to you is, Rik, what is your most successful habit that has brought you to where you are today? Like, I know you had those 2 turning points and all of that, but what is that one habit? If you could just sort of distill it to that one habit, what would you call it?
Okay, it's very relevant at the moment because I started writing an ebook that I just wasn't satisfied that it was going to be an ebook, and I decided to elaborate, and now it's turned into a book. And I call it 5x5 to Thrive. And it's...
Can you repeat that? 5x5 to Thrive.
Exactly. 5x5 to Thrive. So it's a habit that I've used for a very, very long time in my life. But when I had my advertising agency, we were voted at one point as being the most productive advertising agency based on per person.
Right.
And much of it is due to this 5x5 to Thrive. So it's just a principle that at the end of every day, I simply take 5 minutes and I write down 5 things that I want to do and achieve tomorrow.
Okay.
The first thing in the morning, I look at my list of those 5 things and I now prioritize them. So I spend about 5 minutes just going, okay, I'll do this one first, this one next, this one next, this one next. And I also have the opportunity to change them if I need.
Yes.
But then what I do is I say, okay, so number 1 is, and I don't get distracted. I just focus on that first one, focus on the next 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 and next. And that system has caused me to be incredibly productive. And so we at one point had to move all of our training videos off one platform onto another. Wow. It was at that point that I realized how productive I am, because I had created so many videos that it took a team of 3 people 3 months to move those videos onto another platform.
Wow.
So productivity is key. Regardless of what we do, if we can be productive, we can really make a difference.
In a sense, what I'm hearing is that you have a very sort of structured system of prioritization.
Yes.
And you do that the day prior. And I almost call it like having a tight bubble of focus.
Yes.
So when you're doing one thing, you're only doing that one thing.
Yes.
And that is such a key thing in this world of distractions that we live in.
It takes us 30 minutes to actually return to a concept when we've been interrupted.
Yeah.
And so what 5x5 to Thrive really is what's called deep focus. When you have deep focus, you can be so much more productive.
And can I ask you, Rik, how long do you keep that focus for? Just out of curiosity.
Usually I like to keep my elements to about 30 to 40 minutes, just concentrated 30 to 40 minutes.
Got it.
You know,
Got it.
so
All right.
that I could probably concentrate for a whole day,
Yes.
but 30 to 40 minutes I find, you know, doesn't fatigue you as much.
Got it. Well, my question number two that I ask all my guests is, Rik, if all the work that you've done, all the amazing videos that you've made, the books you've written, and we'll talk about your books in a moment, if that was all taken away from you for whatever reason, you know, what would be your three truths that you could pass on to your kids or to loved ones, or anybody, you know?
The three values that I live by are growth is my number one, absolutely my number one. And I can remember my wife sent me a photo of my bedside. And she said, "Look what I've done." And she sent this photo, and my bedside was completely clear. And there's a before and after photo. And the before, there was a stack of books, you know, and I love growth. So there's growth all around me. I love growing and I love developing, because in this space of helping people, you can't just rest on your laurels. You
No.
have to keep current. You have to keep abreast of what's changing. So growth is my number one. Truth is my number two. And what truth essentially stands for is that there is so much rubbish out there. There's a lot of good stuff, but there's a hell of a lot of rubbish out there too. And so I find that my journey is to find what works, what really does work, what's just a, you know, what's just a bit of theory versus what is proven. Beautiful. And so, you know, my clients demand me to get them to shift. So I've got to know what's true, what's proven, what works. Yes. So truth is really important. And also, I think over the years, conditioning, there's been an enormous amount of myths that has been sitting out there. You know, I discovered quite recently that we ended up putting a magnet in Cocoa Pops, you know, the breakfast cereal. Don't do it, because you will pull that out and you will start to see iron filings that are in Cocoa Pops, which means that that's the iron content in Cocoa Pops. Oh my God. You are actually taking in metals when you have breakfast cereal.
Well, yeah, I've stopped taking breakfast cereals because I had to be a role model for my kids.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Tell us, what is your third truth, Rik?
My third happened when I was asked three questions by one of my mentors, which made a big difference to my life. And the three questions, very quickly, he said, how many people in the last 1,000 years had to be born in order for you to be here? So all of a sudden I'm sitting there with my abacus going, okay, there's my mother, my father, and they had me when they were 40. So, and he said, stop. He said, you'll be here for a long time. He said, the answer to that question is a lot. A lot of people were born in 1,000 years to ensure that you are here. So he said, question number two, out of all of those people, what do you know as a legacy that any of them have left? And I sat there and I thought about it. And I couldn't think of any statues. I couldn't think of any, you know, wealthy parcels of land. I couldn't think of any great wisdom or knowledge that anyone had left in a book or a thesis or a white paper. And then he said, you're going to keep going with this, so let me give you the answer to that. The legacy that they left is you. And then he said, but here is the most important question. And he said, this is the one I want you to ponder on. What legacy will you leave? Well,
that was my last question for you, Rik.
Oh,
you kind of read my mind, you know? Like, that was my third and the final question for you. Yeah. So, my God.
That's my third value. Because
you're untraining my own brain in terms of, you know, how you're reading my brain. So, so please, sorry, go on. I want to hear the answer.
Well, the legacy made me rethink everything. And I began to think that a lot of the work that I was doing was unfilmed, you know, unrecorded. And I began to think about it. And a lot of my students, when I ran classes, would say, oh my God, can I get a recording of this? And so I completely changed my entire philosophy. I started recording everything we did. I started putting things on platforms that would mean that they would stay there even after I died.
Yeah.
So I also started thinking from a humanitarian perspective. I'm a big believer in some of the great people that we've experienced through life. You know, John Lennon for one, you know, Mahatma Gandhi, you know, Martin Luther King Jr., you know, Rosie Parks, who inspired him,
Yeah.
you know, all of these great people. And I began to think about it. You know, these people have left this legacy of all of their study, research, and things that they were quoted as saying that has given us a bit of a guide rope to the future. And I really believe that what humanity really, really needs in order for us to really shift, because it is very sketchy as to whether we're going to be here in 1,000 years. You know, there is no absolute proof that we'll still be here in 1,000 years, given how we're treating our planet Earth. So the thing is that I remember once being in my kitchen and asking myself if I was actually going to make a difference to humanity, you know, a positive difference. How can I do that? And I began to think about that. So I thought, I'm going to start sharing my knowledge. So I look for leaders now, and I look for leaders to give my knowledge to, and so that other people can follow in our footsteps and share the knowledge wide and far. So, you know, the piece that I think people have been looking for is, how do I change?
Yeah.
You know, like, I've read all these great books and I've got all this great knowledge, but how do I apply that knowledge in my own personal life? And that's the stuff that I want our legacy to be. You know, I want to keep dropping all these breadcrumbs so that people can follow those and go, if I'm troubled, or if I'm traumatized, or if I've got some issues that I can't shift, how do I do that? How do I change?
And I think just by hearing the passion and the energy that you bring, plus the wealth of client stories, that really draws me to your style of communicating, Rik, is
you.
very impactful. So,
Thank you.
and I think that is what people are looking. They're not looking for a guru who is up there on a platform and, the student is down here with folded hands. They want that relatability. They want to know that this person understands my pain. And I
Yeah.
think that's the disconnect sometimes that we feel when people put themselves on a pedestal. They kind of are there out of their own volition, I would say, in many ways, because they are trying to satisfy their own need.
Exactly, and it's a really important thing to get a perspective of. I often say to my students, don't ever put me on a platform, don't ever put me on a pedestal, because what you're doing by doing that is you're actually saying I could never get there.
Yeah.
And the truth is that anybody can learn anything. Like, my very first value of growth, the reason that that exists is that the one truth is that anyone can be, do, and have anything, as
Yeah.
long as they're prepared to learn.
Correct. Yeah. No, Rik, look, I can I say from the bottom of my heart that I commend you and acknowledge you for the work that you're doing.
Thank
And I
you.
think today, this is the first time we have had such an in-depth conversation. We've known each other for almost over 2 years.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about it just the other day when we were kind of preparing, when I was doing a little bit of preparation for this work. So, and you've been my coach. You've coached me over this period of time, personally, especially when I was going through a lot of changes in my own life and challenges in business and other things. But long and short is that I commend you for your style of communication. You are very impactful, and you're also very thoughtful with your choice of words and your delivery of the content, which is impeccable. So I
Thank
commend
you.
you. Rik, where can people find your work? And I know you've published a lot of books. Where can they find, please, if you could give us some details, that'll be awesome. We'll put it in the show notes as well.
Cool. The probably the best place for people to start is our website, which is lifebeyondlimits.com.au.
Beautiful.
You know,
Beautiful. And
that's
I believe you're on YouTube and other social channels as well.
yeah, it's very easy to find me because there aren't too many Rik Schnabels with RIK as a first
As
name.
a, yes, and the exclamation mark, is that right?
Yeah, well, actually, I changed my name to get rid of the I, because I felt that that was a distinction of getting rid of the ego.
Yeah,
And what I put instead was an exclamation mark, which is I really want to make a point in my life.
yeah.
So that's why I changed the I to an exclamation mark. But they
Wow.
wouldn't technically allow me to do that.
No, I think that's awesome. Awesome, Rick. Thank you so much once again from the bottom of my heart. This has been a very enlightening conversation for me, and I'm sure it will be for many people who would be listening to this interview. Thank you again, Rick, and
Thank you,
good luck with
Arun.
all the work that you're doing.
Awesome. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for the interview, and thank you so much for your time too, and your awesome questions.
My pleasure.